All right, hello everybody. Welcome to our next unit here about, or I'm sorry, the same unit with the Industrial Revolution, but we're going to be talking about reforming the Industrial Revolution. So changes that are going to come about during the Industrial Revolution in the unit, the Industrial Revolution here. All right, so here's our objectives and standards. Take a moment to look over them, please. Take a moment to look over the objectives and standards, please. And our desired result: what reforms came about during the Industrial Revolution? So we've already talked about this a lot, but just to kind of repeat a little bit, that remember that factories were dirty places with dangerous jobs. Workers worked very long hours with very little rest. But by the 1800s, many workers began to press for reforms. They also formed voluntary groups known as unions that would protect and fight for their rights. So unions spoke for all the workers in a certain occupation. Could be a coal mine, could be a factory, could be somewhere else, protecting the workers that work somewhere. And they basically worked to bargain for rights between the workers and the employers. A lot of times they would push for things like higher wages or better working conditions. And if management or the people who own the factory or the coal mine refused these demands, workers could go on strike, or what is refusing to work. Now, unions are going to have some trouble getting reforms passed in Great Britain and the United States in the beginning. In fact, Great Britain actually outlawed unions and strikes when they were first formed, but workers still joined unions despite the threat of prison and being sent to prison for joining a union. And eventually, Great Britain would allow for workers to unionize again. So some labor reforms here. In Great Britain, they prohibited the hiring of children under the age of 9. Children from the age of 9 to 12 could not work more than 8 hours. Children from the ages of 13 to 17 could not work more than 12 hours a day. Women and children were not allowed to work underground. And then women and children in factories had to be limited to 10-hour workdays. In the United States, it took a little bit longer for some of these labor reforms to come to our country here, but people are going to work in the United States to end child labor, and eventually child labor will be banned in the United States as well. And many of these labor reforms you see in Great Britain, such as you can't allow a minor to work only so many hours. You can only do certain positions. Even when you go to apply for a job today, you can't be forced to work, and you can't be placed in a dangerous condition if you're under the age of 18. So many of those labor reforms are from Great Britain, do come over to the United States eventually as well. So the abolition of slavery, we talked about this a little bit already in class on Friday, but remember that William Wilberforce was a religious man and a member of Parliament in Great Britain, and he and others are going to lead the fight for abolition, or the end of the slave trade and slavery in the British Empire. Eventually, Parliament will pass a bill to end the slave trade in 1807, and Great Britain will ban slavery altogether, including in their colonial territories in 1833. Now, in terms of the United States, it's going to be a little bit more of a fight to end slavery, as you're probably aware. But the fight for abolition in the United States would take a longer time, and it also involved the U.S. Civil War. So I put a map here where you can see the blue states, or the Union states, are those against slavery, and then the red states, the Confederate states, which are those in support of slavery, and then the border states, which are kind of in between, and then the grayish color there, the territories. But again, I'm sure maybe you've learned some stuff about the Civil War before, so not to spend too much time on it, but eventually the northern states, or the Union states, will win the Civil War, and slavery will be abolished in the United States as well. But again, not till about 30 or so years later, after Great Britain had done so. Some other reform movements that come around are rights for women. Women workers also began to form groups for better wages and better working conditions. Remember, we talked about the Lowell women, who actually kind of started their own union group to push for better wages and better working conditions, and actually forced the factory owners to kind of back down and give in to their demands. And other women are going to look to other reform areas, such as helping the poor or those in need. And another thing we're going to see is the rise of the women's right to vote movement, which we'll talk about later on down the road. But we'll begin to see the formation of women pushing to gain the right to vote in Great Britain, in the United States, and also elsewhere around the world as well. All right, so other reforms. So education was also a big discussion for reform. And the gentleman's picture you see there on the right-hand side, Horace Mann, reformed the education system in the United States by promoting the idea of free public schools. So prior to this, people had to pay for private tutors, or you had to be wealthy to send your children to school. So Horace Mann says, well, no, everybody's entitled to an education and a free public education in that matter. Now, we still have private schools today, which you probably know about, but there are free public schools as well for children to attend and get an education. Now, other people are also going to look to reform the prison system. Prior to this as well, prisoners were kind of treated poorly. They weren't really given the proper tools to be successful once they got out of prison. So many people believe that prisoners should be prepared to live happier lives upon their release. And you can kind of see that today in the prison system today. Prisoners are kind of given the opportunity to continue education or learn job skills or even counseling to help them prepare themselves for their lives once they're released from prison. All right, so our closure. What reforms came about during the Industrial Revolution? Think about the rights and protections of workers, unions and things like that, rights and safety for women and children. Also think about slavery in Great Britain, the United States, the changes and challenges that happened to that, and also education reform and prison reform. All right, hope you have a great rest of your day or night. Please let me know of any questions or concerns, and hope to talk to you all soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.